They thought I was finished. That's the funny thing about silence. People mistake it for emptiness. I was still wearing black for my husband's funeral when I heard them laughing downstairs, dividing my life like it was already abandoned property. The house still smelled of flowers meant for grief. But grief wasn't what filled the rooms anymore. It was excitement, plans, entitlement. They spoke freely about rooms they'd renovate, things they'd sell, memories they'd discard. They didn't lower their voices. Why would they? To them, I was already gone. They didn't know I was listening. They didn't know I was still thinking. I stood at the top of the stairs, hand on the banister my husband once polished himself, and watched strangers walk through my home, wearing my family's faces. Someone laughed and said, "She won't need any of this much longer." Another replied, "Don't expect anything for her." And they laughed again. What they never understood is that silence isn't weakness. It's observation. It's patience. I had spent decades being quiet on purpose, letting others speak, letting others shine, letting others take credit. Not because I couldn't speak, but because I chose when to. They thought my stillness meant surrender. They thought age had erased me. But while they were counting futures, I was remembering the past. Every sacrifice, every decision, every truth they never bothered to learn. They thought the story was over. It wasn't. It was just waiting for the right moment to be told. The house had barely settled after the funeral. Flowers wilted in their vases, petals browning at the edges, water turning cloudy in crystal bowls no one bothered to change. Condolence cards sat unopened on the piano, stacked neatly, as if grief itself had become an inconvenience. The silence felt temporary, like a pause before something else moved in. And it did, because grief wasn't what brought them back. Greed did. They arrived in clusters, coats still on, voices already loud, walking through the house as if it were a showroom, not a place where a man had lived, loved, and died. Sticky notes appeared on the furniture. Bright, shameless colors slapped onto dark wood and velvet cushions. Meaning. Ours. Save this. They didn't ask. They didn't hesitate. Phones came out, measuring apps glowing blue as they scanned walls, floors, doorways, measuring futures that didn't include me. This will be a spa once she's gone. She won't need this anymore. Don't expect a dime for her. They said it casually, like weather, like facts. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, in my own home, unseen, not invisible, worse, dismissed. I watched my grandson slap a neon note onto the grandfather clock, the same one his grandfather wound every Sunday morning, the same one that chimed softly the night he died. "This one's mine," he said, smiling. My granddaughter circled the living room slowly, phone held high, already redesigning walls that still held my wedding photos. "We'll open this up," she said. "Modernize it." As if history were clutter. As if memory were something you could renovate away. No one looked at me. No one offered a chair. Eventually, I noticed something missing. My seat at the table, where I had sat for decades. Birthdays, holidays, ordinary Tuesdays, was gone. In its place, a folding chair. Metal. Wobbly. Temporary. I lowered myself into it slowly, feeling the way the room adjusted around me, how conversations bent to avoid my presence. Then someone needed the chair. "It's in the way," they said. And just like that, even the folding chair was taken. They gave me a cot in the laundry room, a narrow thing, pressed against a wall that smelled of bleach and damp air. No seats, just a thin blanket and a flickering bulb overhead. A place to wait. That's what it was. Not a room, not a space, a holding pattern, as if my life had already ended, and they were just waiting for my body to catch up. Boxes began appearing upstairs. My things, clothes, books, framed photos, packed quickly, carelessly. I saw labels as they passed by. Donation. Outdated. Old junk. They didn't bother hiding them. Someone laughed near the stairs. She probably won't even notice. They forget something about women like me. We notice everything. I noticed the way my perfume bottles were tossed into a box without lids. The way my scarves were folded wrong. The way my anniversary photo was turned face down and slid behind the fridge. Did they think I wouldn't see it? Or did they think I wouldn't remember? Because memory to them was something I'd already lost. That night, they ate well. I could hear the clink of glasses, the scrape of knives against plates, the low hum of satisfaction. I sat on the cot in the laundry room, listening, waiting, not because I was weak, not because I had nowhere else to go, but because disappearance is a process. And they were very sure. I was already gone. They were wrong, but they didn't know that yet. They said it casually. That's what made it worse. Not with anger, not with shouting, but with smiles, half-laughs, voices light enough to pretend it didn't matter. She just made soup. He built an empire. The words floated through the room like harmless observations, like facts, like something already decided, as if nourishment meant nothing, as if feeding bodies and steadying hearts weren't the foundation everything else stood on. They said it while opening wine, while leaning against door frames, while scrolling through their phones. She just made soup. As if soup hadn't kept children alive through winters. As if it hadn't waited on the stove at midnight for a man who came home broken. As if it hadn't been the quiet promise that someone would always be fed, no matter how bad the day had been. They laughed. He built an empire, they said again, louder this time. As if empires rose without kitchens, without clean shirts, without someone remembering birthdays, appointments, fears. As if success appeared fully formed, untethered from sacrifice. I sat very still. I learned long ago that stillness unnerves people more than protest. It forces them to hear themselves. They joked about my memory. Does she even know what year it is? Careful, she might forget she already ate. They joked about my pulse. She's still breathing? Someone check her wrist. They joked about my expiration date. She won't last long. Give it a year, maybe less. They didn't whisper. Because when people decide you're already gone, they stop being careful. Cruelty doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it wears politeness, like perfume. They spoke over me, around me, through me, as if I were furniture, as if I had already faded into the wallpaper. One of them passed by and said, "You look tired." Not concern. Confirmation. Another said, "She should be grateful we're taking care of things." As if erasing me was an act of kindness. They believed age had softened me into something fragile. That time had worn away my sharp edges, my clarity, my memory. They mistook patience for confusion. What they didn't know, what they never asked, was how many numbers I still remembered, how many contracts I'd read, how many decisions I'd made quietly, while others slept. They forgot who balanced the household when money was tight, who stretched meals, who read fine print, who learned the rules so no one else had to. She just made soup. Yes. And soup fed futures. Soup sat beside hospital beds. Soup kept marriages from breaking under silence. Soup held families together long enough for empires to be built. They mocked what they didn't value because they had never had to do it. They never saw the hours, the mental labor, the invisible scaffolding. They never noticed the woman behind the curtain, holding everything upright, And because they didn't see it, they assumed it didn't exist. That's the danger of invisibility. People forget you're human. Before they forget you're powerful, they laughed again. I didn't join them. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. Because some insults don't deserve an answer.
Some only need time.
And time, I had learned, has a way of revealing exactly who built what. They thought those words diminished me. They didn't realize they had just named the very reason everything they touched still stood. What they never asked and never wanted to know was how that empire survived its darkest hour. Because success prefers clean myths, not messy truths, not sacrifices that don't fit on magazine covers. 15 years earlier, that company everyone praised was drowning, not struggling, not restructuring. Drowning. Banks were calling daily, sometimes hourly, their voices polite but sharp underneath. Deadlines disguised as concern. Deals collapsed mid-signature. Partnerships evaporated overnight. Investors vanished the moment risk entered the room. At dinner, the food went cold. At night, sleep stopped coming. My husband didn't talk about it at first. Men like him never do. But I noticed the signs. The way his hands lingered too long on the doorframe. How he stared at spreadsheets like they were written in another language. How his laugh disappeared, not all at once, but quietly. Then one night he came home early. No phone calls.
No briefcase. No excuses.
He sat down without turning on the lights. Fear was written into his shoulders. Not panic, not hysteria, but the heavy fear of a man realizing he might fail publicly. After a long silence, he finally spoke. They want collateral. Just that. 2 words that meant everything. Collateral meant proof. Something solid. Something valuable enough to convince strangers that tomorrow was worth betting on.
But there was nothing left.
The house was already leveraged. Savings were gone. Friends had become busy. Even pride had stopped pretending. That night, he fell asleep fully dressed. Exhaustion winning the argument hope couldn't. And while everyone slept, I got out of bed. The house creaked like it knew, like it understood this was a turning point. I walked to the bedroom closet, pushed past coats and boxes, and reached the very back of the drawer. No one ever opens unless something is wrong. Inside was a small velvet box. Heavy, not in size, but in meaning. Jewelry passed down through generations. Gold softened by time. A bracelet my grandmother wore through war. Earrings my mother said were for when life gets hard. My wedding ring, resized twice, polished once. Still warm with promises. Each piece held a story, a survival, a woman who endured something so I wouldn't have to. I sat on the floor and held them. I didn't cry, because clarity leaves no room for tears. I understood something in that moment that few people ever do. Love isn't protection from loss. Love is choosing which loss you can live with. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Neutral colors.
No makeup.
At the jeweler's counter, the clerk smiled politely, the way people do when they don't know. They're witnessing an ending. He weighed each piece, wrote numbers on a pad, never once asked where they came from. That's the thing about sacrifice. It rarely comes with witnesses. I sold everything, not some of it, not the pieces I could spare. All of it. When I walked out, my hands felt strangely empty and strangely free. By afternoon, the wire transfer was complete.
No contracts. No acknowledgement. No explanation.
When my husband asked where the money came from, I didn't tell him what was gone. I didn't want gratitude. I didn't want guilt. I told him one thing. Use it. Just don't let them see you fall. And he didn't. The company survived that quarter. Then the next. Barely at first, but breathing. Years passed. The crisis was rewritten as a bold pivot. The risk reframed as courage. The rescue renamed brilliance. At conferences, people shook his hand and said, "You built this from nothing." I stood beside him and smiled, because they never knew that nothing once sat in a small velvet box at the back of a drawer, and they never asked, because people love the idea of genius, but they rarely ask who paid the price. Later, when the company prepared to go public, he didn't know how to explain the future, not because there wasn't one, but because the future is difficult to sell when you're still afraid of the past. The bankers wanted confidence. The board wanted certainty. The market wanted a story that made risk feel intelligent. My husband came home with folders under his arm and panic behind his eyes.
They want a vision, he said.
They want to know what comes next. He stared at the dining table like it might answer him. He had survived the storm. But survival isn't a strategy. It's just relief. That night, after the house went quiet, I cleared the kitchen table. Not dramatically, methodically, papers aligned, a single lamp, a pen that didn't skip. I didn't announce what I was doing. I never did. I started where truth lives, in numbers, revenue patterns, market behavior, what failed, why it failed. Then I moved to what scares people most, the future. What could grow? What must shrink? What could break again? If no one was honest. Hours passed. The clock clicked forward like it was counting something important. I wrote about strategy, not ambition dressed as confidence, but discipline pretending to be boring, about growth, not explosive fantasies, but quiet expansion that doesn't attract predators, about survival, because any empire that forgets its near death will repeat it. By morning, my hands ached. The document was clean,
Precise.
unemotional,
No adjectives. No ego.
just a map. I printed it. No name.
No letteread. No explanation.
I mailed it anonymously. A few weeks later, he came home smiling. Not relieved, impressed. "Someone sent me the smartest proposal I've ever read," he said. "They understand the company better than anyone." He read me lines from it, like they were poetry. I nodded, stirred the soup. At the next meeting, the board leaned forward. Bankers stopped interrupting. Journalists scribbled faster. They called it visionary. They said he had remarkable foresight. They said he saw around corners. I watched from the edge of the room, introduced as support, never as source. The company went public. The applause was loud. The silence after was louder. Because silence can be generous. It can protect. It can preserve. It can allow someone else to stand tall when the wind would otherwise knock them down. But silence is a debt, and if it goes unpaid long enough, it erases you, not all at once,
Just slowly enough.
that no one notices you were ever there. What they never noticed was the floorboard near the window, the one that creaked differently, the one everyone stepped over, without ever wondering why. People rarely look down when they believe they're already standing on your life. Beneath that board was a folder, not hidden in fear, hidden in patience. I placed it there years earlier, back when silence was still a choice, and not a sentence. Inside were things that don't age, the way people do. Legal documents, stamped, dated, verified, proof of investment. Every wire, every transfer, Traced to a source no one ever questioned. Original drafts. Business language in my handwriting. Margins filled with corrections. That later became strategy. And a patent. Registered quietly. Legally. Under a name they didn't recognize.
Mine.
I remember the day I filed it.
No celebration. No announcement.
Just a signature. And a notary stamp. That sounded louder than it should have. I didn't tell my husband. Not because he wouldn't understand, but because some truths need protection before they need recognition. Years passed. The house filled with voices again. Laughter that didn't belong to me. Footsteps that felt entitled. They treated the walls like inventory, the memories like leftovers. They didn't ask what I kept. They assumed I kept nothing. Because when a woman goes quiet, people assume she's empty. They were wrong. Every insult they spoke was time-stamped, every assumption recorded. While they joked about my usefulness, I updated documents. While they guessed my expiration date, I renewed registrations. While they erased me socially, I made myself permanent legally. Receipts are patient. They don't interrupt. They don't argue. They wait. Sometimes for years. I hadn't spoken for a long time, not because I had nothing to say, but because the truth doesn't need rehearsal. When it's written in ink, the folder stayed beneath the floorboard. Through birthdays, holidays, funerals. It didn't demand attention. It didn't need validation. It simply existed, ready, because silence isn't surrender. It's storage. And I had kept everything. They dressed for victory, not black. That would have suggested respect. They wore sharp colors, confident fabrics, clothes chosen for photographs, not grief. In the mirror, they practiced signatures, initials, flourishes, the handwriting of people already spending money they hadn't earned. On the drive over, they planned purchases, a vacation house, a renovation, a new car in his honor. They spoke of the future, as if it were already theirs. I was placed at the end of the table, not intentionally cruel, just conveniently dismissive, close enough to be present, far enough to be irrelevant. The chair scraped slightly as I sat. No one noticed. The lawyer arrived precisely on time. Leather briefcase. Neutral expression. A man trained to witness endings, without reacting to them. He greeted everyone evenly.
No favorites. No worms.
Then he nodded once and said, "We'll begin." The room stilled. Papers were arranged. Pens uncapped. Someone smiled. And then, my husband's voice filled the room. Not imagined. Not remembered. Recorded.
Calm.
Measured. Unmistakably his. The sound of it rearranged the air. A few people stiffened. One laughed nervously, then stopped. The lawyer explained, "This recording accompanies the written will. It is legally binding." No one objected. They were too busy listening. If my son ever speaks ill of his mother, the recording said, steady and deliberate, deduct $1 million per word. The sentence hung there, too precise to misunderstand, too specific to dismiss. Someone inhaled sharply. Silence fell like gravity. The lawyer didn't pause. He continued. Any recorded statement, overheard conversation, or verified remark will be transcribed and deducted accordingly. Then he opened a folder and began to read. Not opinions, not interpretations, transcripts,
Dates. Times.
voices identified. She won't last long anyway. A pause. A calculation. 1 million. She doesn't even know what's going on. 2 million. She's just in the way now. 3. Every joke. Every casual.
Cruelty.
Every sentence spoken. Because they thought I was already gone. The lawyer read without emotion. Numbers accumulated. Millions erased in seconds. Pens slipped from fingers. Faces drained of color. One person whispered, "That can't be real." The lawyer didn't look up. "It is." Another tried to laugh.
Failed.
Someone finally turned to look at me. Really look, as if searching for warning signs. For anger. For triumph. I gave them none. I sat exactly as I had been placed. Quiet.
Still. Present.
The recording ended. The silence afterward was louder than shouting. No one spoke, because for the first time, their words had weight, and it was crushing them. Then came the second folder. It was thinner than the first, unassuming, the kind of thing people underestimate, right until it changes everything. The lawyer didn't announce it dramatically. He simply placed it on the table and opened it. Inside was the anonymous proposal, the one that had saved the company years ago, the one the board had praised, the one investors still quoted. The lawyer read its title. A few heads lifted. He read the executive summary. Someone frowned. Then he continued, line by line. The language was unmistakable, not because they recognized it, but because he did. My husband's handwriting appeared next. Not his signature. His annotations. Margins filled with reactions. Exclamations. Approvals. Evidence of belief. Then the lawyer reached the appendix. The proposal was submitted anonymously, he said, but the author was later identified through forensic review.
He paused.
Handwriting analysis. Structural phrasing. Draft comparison. All consistent. With me. The room shifted. Not gasps. Not outrage. Something colder. Realization. Then came the patent. Filed years earlier. Registered properly. Maintained meticulously. A process improvement that became the company's backbone. The name on it was unfamiliar to them, but not to the law.
Mine.
The lawyer's voice remained steady. The intellectual property, including royalties, derivative rights, and ownership percentages, resides solely with the patent holder. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The empire wasn't built for me. It was built from me. Royalties.
Rights.
Ownership. All legally mine. Someone finally spoke. That doesn't make sense. The lawyer looked up for the first time. It makes documentation. He turned the page. Then came my husband's final letter. Not typed. Handwritten. The kind of writing a man leaves when he knows time is limited. The lawyer read aloud. She kept quiet because she loved me, because she believed confidence mattered more than credit. But she was always the mind behind the map. No one moved. No one interrupted. The letter continued. I protected her silence in life. I'm correcting it in death. The paper trembled slightly as the lawyer turned the page. No one laughed then, because truth has a way of rearranging the room. Faces that once held certainty now held calculation. People who thought they understood the story realized they had only memorized the headline. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The truth had finally learned to speak for itself. And it was fluent. They were given 48 hours. Not as punishment, as procedure. The lawyer's voice was calm. When he said it, as if endings were just another schedule to manage. 48 hours. To pack what was theirs. And what remained would no longer include me. The house emptied quietly this time. No laughter echoing down the halls. No music. No toasts raised in celebration. Just the sound of tape being pulled from cardboard boxes. The soft thud of belongings.
Set down too carefully.
Regret has a weight. You can hear it in the way doors close gently. When people finally understand, they're not welcome. No one joked about renovations. No one measured rooms. They avoided the walls, avoided the mirrors, avoided me, because silence feels different when it's earned. I watched from the doorway as a lifetime of assumptions was carried out piece by piece. The house breathed again. Then my son asked to speak to me, not loudly, not with excuses. He stood where the light didn't flatter him. I didn't know, he said. I nodded. I should have asked. That one mattered more. Forgiveness doesn't begin with apology. It begins with recognition. I didn't yell. I didn't list what he'd said, what it cost. I didn't punish, because consequences had already done their work. I looked at him, really looked, and I said quietly, "You spoke first." The truth answered. He swallowed. There was nothing left to argue. Some lessons arrive late, but they arrive whole. And when the door finally closed behind him, the house was still. Not empty, just honest. I walked through the house alone. Not immediately. I waited until the air settled, until the echoes finished leaving. There's a sound a house makes when it no longer expects anyone else. A kind of honesty in the quiet. I moved room to room without a list, without urgency. The first thing I removed was a small blue sticker from the hallway wall. It marked a future someone else had already planned. I peeled it off slowly. The adhesive resisted, as if even paper believed it had a claim. I dropped it into the trash. Then another, and another. Stickers on furniture, tags on cabinets, notes that said mine, without ever earning the word. Every sticker, every claim, each one came off with a soft sound, not dramatic, but final. Some left behind faint outlines, ghosts of intention. I didn't scrub them away. I let them be, proof that something tried to take root here
And failed.
In the living room, I stood where laughter once gathered, where grief had later been measured
And priced.
I straightened a picture frame. No one else had bothered to hang properly. I opened the windows. Fresh air doesn't rush in. It waits for permission. In the kitchen, I found a note tucked into a drawer. A shopping list. In handwriting that wasn't mine. I read it once, then tore it cleanly in half. Ownership isn't claimed by ink. It's claimed by care. I passed the staircase slowly. The steps no longer creaked in protest. They sounded relieved. In the bedroom, I folded the blankets myself. Not because they were messy, but because order is a language
The body understands.
When I finished inside, I stepped into the yard. The grass had grown uneven, corners forgotten, and there, near the fence, was the rose bush.
Small. Thorny.
Overlooked, its leaves dull, its soil cracked. No one had touched it in months. I knelt down and pressed my fingers into the earth.
Dry.
Neglect doesn't kill immediately. It waits. I brought water. Not much. Just enough. The soil darkened slowly, as if remembering what nourishment felt like. I trimmed one dead branch, then another. Care isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself.
It repeats.
I stood back and looked at the house. Stripped of assumptions. Returned to truth. Roots survive even when neglected. They wait. They conserve. They remember. And when the time is right, they grow again. Quietly. But undeniably, I sold the house. Not out of anger, not to erase the past, but because some places hold chapters, not futures. I walked through it one last time, before handing over the keys. Touched the doorway where height was measured, the window that caught morning first, the floorboard that once held truth in silence. Then I left it behind. I moved somewhere quiet, not isolated, intentional. A place where mornings arrive gently, and no one expects anything of me, except honesty. The quiet gave me room to think. And in that space, I built something new. Not a company, not a monument, a fund for women whose work was hidden behind other names, ideas credited elsewhere, labor labeled support, minds that built quietly, while others collected applause.
No spotlight. No speeches.
Just recognition. Letters arrived slowly at first, then steadily. Stories I recognized without meeting the faces.
I didn't correct the past.
I changed the future. At my door hangs a small wooden sign. Hand-carved. Simple. This home was built by someone they underestimated. It's not a warning. It's a reminder. For anyone who stands there, wondering if they matter. If you've ever been overlooked, talked over, written out of your own story, remember this. Silence doesn't mean absence. It means patience. And your story isn't over until you decide it is. Some minds build quietly. They don't announce themselves. They don't interrupt rooms. They don't demand applause. They work late, think deeply, and leave evidence only time can read. Some truths wait patiently, not because they're weak, but because they're precise. They wait for the moment, when denial runs out of energy, when noise collapses under its own weight. If this story resonated with you, it's not an accident. It means you recognize something. Maybe a moment when your voice was softened to make others comfortable. Maybe a time your work was labeled help instead of what it truly was. Foundation. There are countless stories like this. Women who carried visions in silence, who protected fragile egos while building durable futures, who were told to wait and use the time wisely. They didn't disappear. They prepared. This space exists for them, for the unseen architects, the quiet strategists, the minds behind the maps. If you stay, you'll hear more stories like this, not shouted, but spoken clearly. Stories that don't ask for permission to exist. Subscribe not out of habit, but out of recognition. Because when we listen to quiet truths, we make room for our own to speak. And some stories are only waiting for someone willing to hear them.